go over a couple things with you. I'm writing something. First, let me ask you, I know that when the sheriff has gone to these to the city council, to the budget hearings that have gone on the last couple of weeks, there have been different people at different days that have shown up with him. About a week and a half ago, there was a series of questions that was posed to him about the process, the special services contract. And I'm not sure, were you there at that time?
Yes.
You were, okay, good. So you saw it. Since that time, I talked to Councilman Crescent, went through some of the paperwork that he's seen.
Right.
And kind of understand where he's coming from. And I'm seeing this report that was done last year within the sheriff's office, summarizing that there was a review of these claims. Folks who signed the paperwork looked at their different signatures and said, "Yep, that's mine, and that's mine also." And sheriff's office went away saying, "All right, there's really no basis for saying there was any false signing here." That being the case, the councilman had this question that he posed to the sheriff. He said, "All right, I get that last year, there was a contract that was halfway, that was still running. You didn't have a basis for canceling contract midstream. You didn't find something where you'd say, you're doing something wrong, we're going to revoke the contract." But this year, there was a time period here for the option to renew it for another year. Did you guys consider whether to rebid this contract at that point?
Well, first of all, to back up just a minute on a few things.
Okay.
Were you ever apprised of the previous vendor and how we handled that investigation? Because any allegations of misconduct involving vendors, we take very seriously, and we thoroughly investigated the previous complaint against the company that was debarred, and when a complaint came in on the current vendor that we're using, and it was a letter of complaint from actually his office manager that initiated that. We took it just as seriously as we did the allegations of misconduct against him, and we went through a thorough investigative process involving the company's owner and every process server that works for that company, not just the ones that they showed us some possible discrepancies on the signatures. So we went above and beyond even what the allegations were in the letter, and didn't just limit our interviews to those that had discrepancies. We interviewed everyone that worked for that company, and every single buddy that was interviewed by our economic crimes detective, who did the same interviews with the previous vendor, and had a history and a good feel for everything that transpired in that case and subsequent in this case. So there was a continuity in that investigation. Came to the end result that by statute cannot prove that those signatures are a forgery. The previous vendors, process servers, admitted that they signed the other person's name. And so we had a very different outcome of that investigation that we did with the subsequent investigation. The allegations were similar, but when the investigation was complete, an absolute determination of forgery could not be determined based on the elements that required that statute, to be proven.
Yeah.
They all said, yes, they're mine. We signed sometimes 20, 30, 40 of these. We have one of the gentlemen that's listed here is elderly with serious health issues.
Yeah, I understand.
That involves a lot of
like cerebral palsy or something like that.
Yeah, something like that affects his signature. But when I say, Steve, is this your signature? and you say yes, other than in cases of probate where a will is involved and the person is not there to say this is my signature, we have no further recourse. Meaning, if you come to me and say, Carol, did you sign this document? And I say yes. Well, it doesn't look like your signature. Well, you know, my hand was tired that day. I signed a lot of documents, or I wasn't feeling good. And I signed mine very differently. Now, you know, we look at them and say, yeah, they do look different. But bottom line is not what we suspect, not what we perceive, or not what another vendor is accusing a current vendor of doing who has subsequently been disbarred. And there's, quite honestly, there's some bad blood there.
Oh, absolutely.
So, you know, I have to take a very neutral stance. I cannot get involved in between what's going on with these vendors. I have to handle them with an unbiased, pristine investigation and let the chips fall where they may. And the chips could not prove, in this case, that there was a forgery involved. And that's where we ended it. And quite honestly, this company is doing a fine job, and I made the recommendation that we continue to use this company.
And Councilman's point that he seemed to be driving at was all right, you cannot prove something, fair enough. But there was and so you had a contract already with this company. No reason midstream to cancel the contract. However, we're at this point, I think, coming into a year of an optional renewal. And so what I'm going back to is, given that there was, I realize you cannot prove something. Yet you look at these signatures and you think, yeah, some of them do look different. Was that something that caused you to consider whether to rebid, just to see if you get someone else, just to see if you get anyone who would do things different?
I have a very good track record with this company.
Okay.
We have used her, I guess, and I think she took over the company once her dad retired. I believe for about 30 years now, a history with the sheriff's office. Little to no complaints, high level of professionalism in the service. We do spot checks on her paperwork in her office, very organized, everything contractually that's obligated for record keeping.
Okay.
And statutory requirements, she meets by the letter of the law. We do not, in the sheriff's office, routinely just throw out RFPs when we have a vendor in good standing with renewals.
Okay.
The renewal process is a very efficient way for us to, October 1, continue the professional services that we've contracted with. If I were to put out an RFP, you're talking months and months worth of work. The process is laborious. Quite honestly, when we put out this bid, we started in early 2008, we worked on it probably almost a year because it was such a complex RFP. We worked with city procurement, Chief Clapsaddle's office, you know, very closely with them because it was a very difficult and a very arduous RFP process. And we got what we feel is a good contract, a satisfactory vendor, little to no complaints, and they serve, you know, probably 20,000, 30,000 documents a year, and you're looking at 0 to maybe 1 complaint here and there. I'll tell you what, in good conscience, I have no reason to get rid of this vendor, other than somebody else asking me to. But I don't believe they have the in-depth knowledge, history, and track record that I do with this vendor. So my level of confidence is obviously a lot higher than theirs. But I'm personally involved in it and have a 10-year history with this company.
Which also gives you a level of perspective.
And it gives me a much more, yes, realistic perspective on this whole issue.
Okay. And in 2008, when there was an RFP, you ended up at that point having two companies. You split the work between two vendors.
That's correct.
Was that prior to 2008? Had that been the same practice, or had it been?
We have, it kind of ebbed and flowed over the years, and I can only go back to 2001 when I became Chief of Services and actually commanded this particular area of the department. At that time, there was like maybe two or might have been three vendors. And then one of them dropped out, and then at some point another one dropped out, and then the company that we're currently using was basically the only one left standing. And again, we had no issues, the documents were getting done in a timely manner, no complaints, so we continue to use that company.
Let me ask you about that now. Because you talked about, you're getting good results. Give me some idea of the kinds of things that you look for to your sort of yardsticks for this is working out the way we want.
Well, there's time limits based on the type of document it is.
Okay.
They have to be served within certain time constraints. That's directed by state statute.
Yeah.
That's not our JSO policy. That's statutorily driven. So we make sure those documents are within those timeframes being served, that there's due diligence being done on the service. We even created what's called a process server worksheet. That we require them to keep notes and to submit with that return of service, or if it's not served, then obviously when they return the documents non-served, to show that they did due diligence. For example, on some, if you try to 2 attempts in one day, they have to be 6 hours apart. You can't, like at 12 and at 1, go to the same house. So we look at those time frames and inspect, do random inspections. Now we can't look at every one because there's thousands of these, but we randomly inspect to make sure those are in compliance. We have thresholds that we look for level of service. Are they serving at least 60% of these documents? Trying to use a yardstick to say.
Essentially, so that they're not just cherry.
So they're not just cherry picking and going after the easy ones. That they're trying to serve those hard ones, the child support and then the other documents. That's pretty much it. And again, we do office, and we don't announce when we go to the office and say pull the file. We just show up. So they don't know we're coming. They don't have a chance to kind of prep and get everything in order. So we want to see them, how they run their day-to-day operations. We do interviews with the process servers. We do a multitude of things to make sure that statutorily they are in compliance with the requirements.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said few to no complaints. What are the kinds of things that people might complain about the company doing this kind of?
Probably have to pull a complaint log, but a few that I can remember, and not on the current company, but on the company that was debarred. Every time they called to try to find out the status of the service, they couldn't get an answer. They never got a call back. There was a difficulty in return communications. My understanding was it was because they were short-staffed. They didn't have time to return phone calls. That was one of the most common ones I remember in that particular situation.
And the people who would be checking on the status of this would be what sorts of things, like law firms?
Oh, yeah, yes, law firms. I have a record of complaints if you'd like. I could probably try to review some for you.
That's
but
okay. I'm just
trying to get a feel for it. Yeah.
But so basically, one of the things that would be an issue could be an issue if there was like bad communication, essentially bad customer service.
That's actually the way you said it. Customer service, I would say, is probably one of the biggest complaints. They feel like they're not getting responses back in a timely manner. Customer service related.
Okay, cool. I gotta say, I'm surprised by one thing here, and this is just because I'm not familiar with this. I want to make sure that I'm stating this accurately. So, going back to a point you made earlier, if you look at something, if you're an economic crimes investigator looks at a document, and you know, and one has some very graceful form of signature, and another one looks like, you know, it's a guy who's recovering from a recent head injury, and it's, you know, and that person says, yeah, that's my signature, both of them. Those are both me. That is it. That's the extent of how far that economic crimes investigator can pursue that.
Well, in this particular case, we have no victim. You know,
Right.
when we went to the state attorney's office on the previous vendor, and we had the admission of forgery, he basically said, listen, technically there's no victim, we'll just file returns, you know, because you can update a return of service. It doesn't invalidate the service, it just brings all the current facts to the affidavit. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but you can do an updated return of service if there's some kind of clerical error, or you say, oh, this signature isn't right. Okay, you can do that and clean it up. So they felt like since none of the service was bad, there was no victim, no need to pursue.
And that was in a case where there was a clear admission by
Where there
folks
was a clear
that said,
admission.
yes, we actually had someone on staff.
But
here
they did
who
an
signed
amended
this.
return, that's what it's called. They did an amended return of service, so there was no victim, really no harm. They didn't see the sense in pursuing, and that was with an admission on a forgery.
Okay, that was.
So that was a more serious allegation of misconduct than what we're dealing with here.
And again, that was a prosecutor at the state attorney's office
Yes.
looked at it and said,
Yeah.
no, we're touched it. Okay.
Statutorily, I think it would result in a $10 fine would be the only penalty on
Okay.
that, and they basically said no. So in this case, and again, you know, we don't even have that. We have people saying that's my signature. We have even less. So truly, we did parallel, these investigations were handled identical.
Okay.
No one was given deference. We went through the same arduous, painstaking investigative process to try to uncover anything we could to come to a determination of what direction we were going to go in, and it just wasn't there in this case. It wasn't there. And we're not going to manufacture something that's not there. We deal with facts, not perceptions and not emotions. We deal with facts. And the fact is, we can't prove that this is not their signatures.
Okay.
Now, have you talked to Special Services yet?
Nope. It's my next stop.
Okay.
Does that get the two questions that you came at the story with?
I'm
Okay.
fine. I'm fine. That takes care of my questions. I appreciate it. Thank you. You said somewhere between 20 and 30,000 documents you think would be fair figure?
I could get you a number.
If that's gettable, it would be very, very useful.
Yeah, let me get you the number. I want to give you a good number. I don't
Thank
want to, but it's in that range, but I'll pull it for you unless,
Sure, or
Once
you
I
can
get
call,
it,
yeah,
we
he's
can-
got to give it a frame of reference
Right.
to
No,
the story, so
I agree.
that, yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
All right, cool. We're all set.